Hello, everybody. Chad Eves here, and welcome to this episode of the Meaningful Communication Show. Myself and co-host Michael Gansel here with guest Charles Bernard. He is an entrepreneur, the founder of Criteria for Success, and also some other ventures that we're going to learn about today. And with that, Michael, why don't you get us started with the conversation today?
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Chad, good afternoon. Charles, great to see you again. And this is going to be a very exciting podcast, I hope. Charles and I know each other for quite a number of years. We go back. We actually spent a lot of time in a foxhole together. That's just well, we'll talk more about it later. Anyway, this is really wonderful. This is a real treat to have Charles Bernard here. Charles, you have a company called Criteria for Success. You've been doing that for 14 years. You have some new ventures, which we'd love to hear about. And so actually, we're just going to ask you a question. Is sort of like, tell us about yourself. Tell us something that I don't know.
Well, thank you both. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm getting to know Chad, really nice guy in the short amount of time that we've spoken together. And Michael and I do know each other for many years. We work together in Michael's company, Netland, and I have nothing but fond memories of both the good and the growing pains that came with that.
You didn't want to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, huh?
The good, the bad, and the ugly is a good way to represent that. I'll tell you a little bit about my personal background. I was born in Madrid, Spain. Fluent, which seems to come in handy in New York City, where I live. I would say we're virtually bilingual at this point, so there's a lot of Spanish speakers here, and many of my friends are Hispanic, so that helps me brush up on my Spanish. I grew up, though, that's where the accent's from, in the UK, just outside London, and my work background is I started as a programmer with an IBM language that is probably a dinosaur at this point, PL1. And I did a lot of coding, and then I was promoted into designing systems, which I adore even today. Anything techie I love. And that's why I love Michael and my company. I was a junior partner with Michael, and we had a techie company together. And so I've always maintained a foot in tech, which is again a passion. I was recruited in London to come over as a consultant, and the company that recruited me in London, I'm not sure if you knew this, Michael, but the company that recruited me in London was purchased by General Electric. And so overnight, we went from a fairly decent sized company, I'd say we were probably about 500 employees, to this mega corporation, which is, in the top 100, I would imagine, even today. And that opened up a lot of opportunity for me in terms of my background growing, working with some very large companies. And probably one of the most exciting companies I worked for when I was a GE consultant, well, actually there's two, and they're very different. One is the United Nations. I did a great consulting gig there, and I would lunchtimes and evenings, I was single, I was in my 20s, I would literally go down to the secretariat that most people see on television, where they have these ambassadors and presidents and all these different dignitaries addressing the United Nations. And I just soaked all that stuff up. And then the other company that was noteworthy for me is Mobil Oil, because it was at Mobil Oil that I really went from being a tech-oriented professional to a sales-oriented professional. And that in of itself is a story that I don't think we have time for, but I'm a father of a wonderful daughter who is 33 years old, husband, although we're amicably divorced.
Now we're really getting personal.
Yeah. And I live with someone that I really enjoy living with in a small apartment. And I think in Manhattan, you have to really have a good partner to live in a small apartment like we do. To tell you how small it is, today we're going to visit friends where we're doing a potluck, and we're going to use the oven. We call it our oven closet because we stashed all this stuff inside the oven that wouldn't fit in our other closets. So that gives you a sense of our one bedroom, although the view from here is spectacular. We're in the financial district and I'm on the 37th floor, and I have a great view of Manhattan.
So bring us up to the present, Charles.
Well, professionally, I'm very happy to be involved in a new venture that started about 2 years ago.
Well, before you start with the new venture, let's talk about Criteria for Success, because that's what you've been doing for 14 years, and I know that's really an amazing company. So let's talk about that, because I know that people really want to hear about what you've been able to do professionally, and you've done this for quite some time. And as I know, worked with some incredible people, some incredible companies. So tell us about Criteria for Success, and then we'll get to Calavia.
Wonderful. Well, so Criteria for Success was founded on a premise that I would integrate technology, which I've spoken about, and sales and revenue development. And to your point, Michael, about working with some wonderful companies, we've been very blessed to work with some named companies like EMC, Dell, IBM, Weather Channel, kind of WebMD was a big...
Small companies, right, Charles? Small?
Right. So we've had a few of those, but actually our sweet spot are more small, mid-sized companies that I would say max out at about a couple of hundred employees. And the audience may be interested to know that I love working with small companies because we tend to play a bigger role. And because of that, we're working usually with the CEO and the C-suite, and we're very embedded in the work that we do. And the way we've designed our work is that we usually stay involved for a minimum of a year with a client, and we get to know them pretty well. And so what I'm also fascinated about in my company, Criteria for Success, is that we've literally been always at the leading edge of selling evolution, the evolution of sales and marketing. And I don't know if you guys would agree, but I've noticed that marketing and sales traditionally, at least 14, 15 years ago, were more apart than they are today. Now it's almost like there is no line anymore. It's almost they're one and the same. What I mean by that is marketing would always kind of support selling with collateral and the usual stuff. And now marketing is revenue generating. Like if you think of inbound marketing, if you think of platforms like HubSpot and Marketo and some of these others that are out there, they are literally leading the top of funnel, as we call it, for sales. So they're providing leads, and in some cases they're being measured on revenue conversion. So and then to bring you to present day.
Well, wait, one more thing. I want to understand what did Criteria for Success, or what does Criteria for Success do for its clients?
So we provide sales playbooks, sales process, coaching, consulting, and management consulting. Management consulting is a catch-all for essentially everything from I need to hire more people, I need to improve my hiring practices, I don't know if I have the right sales manager in place, I'm not sure if my marketing operations and sales team are working together. That would all fit under what I call management consulting. And then you have your traditional leadership training, sales training, and playbook development. We have it would take hours to explain, but we have a whole process. We have a platform that we bring to our clients in terms of developing a sales process for them.
I think that's a really interesting point that you make, Charles, is how different parts of a company work together has changed so much. So one of the areas that I work with people in is, communication skills. But it was once upon a time, my background's in IT as well. I began off as a Lotus Notes developer once upon a time. And I was also a consultant with PwC. So I have that big consulting experience that you were also describing. But it was almost a church and state type of thing. The engineers did not talk to sales, and marketing and sales hated each other. And then, you had legal hanging around there somewhere, and there wasn't a lot of intermingling, a lot of integration now. And that's not the way that, you can survive or really thrive, anymore nowadays. And I'm curious, when you work with the different size firms, what do you see as, or are there any differences in how you approach that communication with them, as far as, do they welcome that kind of integration, or are they still kind of separate? And what does your company do in those situations?
That's a great question, Chad. And I'll tell you why I think it's a great question, because part of our qualification to determine if we're a good fit is the willingness of our client to do one thing that most of them have not done. And that is to consider forming a sales growth team, or a revenue, or nowadays we call it a profit growth team. And this was something that evolved over time. And the reason we call it now a profit growth team is our clients, before they become clients, they're obviously prospects. They'd raise their hand and say, "Can you define that? What does that mean?" And we say there are 5 core functions in most organizations we work with: sales, operations, human resources, finance, and marketing. And if you think about profit, because for some reason it's easier to align profit than revenue, for those 5 functions, whether it's a distinct department or whether it's just someone wearing that hat in a smaller company, doesn't really matter to us. But if you can get those 5 functions working together to generate profit, then you're more likely to succeed, because the key ingredient, at least from my standpoint, and Michael, this hasn't changed since I started the company, is collaboration. That's the secret. If you can unlock that collaboration, I think you will succeed. And I'll tell you where I find collaboration matters the most. When things are going well, it almost doesn't matter if you're collaborating. It's like sales is doing their thing, operations is doing their thing, everyone's doing their thing. We're making money, we're healthy, everything's going well. Collaboration, in my mind, especially when it comes to generating profit, is when you test it. When you test collaboration. And what I mean by that is something that's near and dear to most of us is when there's an economic downturn, or there's a circumstance beyond everybody's control, like COVID, or the financial crisis, or 9/11, or the depression, you name it, right? That's when you test how collaborative is the team. And the person that really has to answer the question at the very top is the CEO. And so that's, to your point, to your question, Chad, in terms of, how we work with clients. If they're not willing to form a growth team, a profit growth team, revenue growth team with those 5 functions, we're very clear we're not going to be a good fit, because we have to get those stakeholders invested in the very process that sales process, if you will, sales and marketing process will be developed so they can thrive. Because the worst person you can ever give a sales process development project to is the head of sales. The worst person ever. Because that person generally, I know there's exceptions, is not a process person. They're a people person. And even if you give them the task, and they're obviously not the ones doing the work, but they're going to want to get that project off their plate as fast as possible. And who on their team has got the skills to develop a robust sales process? And worse, they're going to miss the forest for the trees because, and we experienced this when Michael and I worked together, you'll oftentimes find that sales and operations are at loggerheads. You know, they're kind of fighting each other. You know, sales will say, you guys are sales prevention. You're making us jump through all these hoops to make a sale. And operations will go to sales and say, yeah, well, you sell stuff. We're the ones who deliver that stuff. And we're the ones who hear the clients complaining and moaning about all the terrible promises you made that we can't keep. So it would almost make common sense that if we're going to develop a process, a robust sales and marketing process, don't you want to get operations involved because they're going to have a hand in that? And don't you want to get finance involved because they're more likely to talk about pricing and profit and commission plans? And don't you want to get human resources involved because they're going to have to hire the salespeople and train them and develop them and onboard them? And oh, by the way, shouldn't marketing have a role in developing a sales playbook, especially if we're on the hook to develop leads for the sales team?
So now, Charles, you've led us to, I think, Calavia, haven't you?
Yes.
Right.
So that's a great
new adventure. Great segue, right?
Great segue, Michael. So Calavia is the platform that we have essentially taken all this knowledge that we've amassed over the years using a third-party tool that we didn't own and decided to create our version that we could build from the ground up with our expertise and our knowledge and our wisdom and our process. And I'm very proud of my team that have worked really hard. We actually hired a couple of developers in Estonia. And if you would have asked me what I thought about that decision, I would have said, what are you, crazy? I mean, there's a time zone, there's a language gap, although the language gap has not been a problem. They're really fluent.
They speak Spanish, fluent Spanish in Estonia, don't they?
In Asturias, in northern Spain, they do. But I'll tell you, and I know you both have been involved in tech, and I'd be curious if you agree that it's great to find a developer that can follow a spec, right? You tell them what you want, you spell it out, and they do it on time, and they do it well without any bugs. That's not my definition of a great developer. It's definitely table stakes and it's required. My definition of a good developer is what we have, and that is someone who takes an idea and does a lot of what ifs. Well, wait a minute. What if we change this table that you want to create all these different features and benefits and things that belong in a sales process, and we change it and we make it look this way versus the way you originally conceived of? Because from a user experience, we think that would be, so getting a tech who can code, but can also think for the user, like what is the UX experience? What is the user experience? To me, is worth their weight in gold.
Yes, they are. So tell us about the experience that the user has using Calavia. Tell us more about that.
So we started with a simple concept of a kind of like a wiki, if you will, which is easy to edit. You don't need a lot of training. And we thought if we can provide templates to clients of what we think is probably going to be 90% of every sales process. So for example, and I'm talking B2B sales, not B2C, which is a different animal. So in the B2B world, if you're in a consultative sell, and again, I use these terms and people raise their hand and say, okay, what does that mean? And I say, well, my easy definition of a consultative sell is one where you're problem solving. And some businesses don't want to solve problems. That's like, it's not scalable, it's too much work, price, terms, conditions, here it is, go buy it and we're done. That's not our sweet spot. So we go after companies who are in a consultative sell. And if you're in a consultative sell and you think about it, every salesperson needs to ask questions. Every salesperson needs to be able to surface problems. Every salesperson needs to be able to run an agenda for a meeting, a good agenda. Every salesperson needs to be able to relate problems to features and benefits and solutions. And lastly, every good salesperson needs to practice what we call discovery-based selling. And again, people raise their hand and go, what does that mean? And we say, well, the best way to define it is in a rhetorical question. Is it better for your buyers to be told how great you are, or is it better for them to discover how great you are? And of course, everyone's like, well, yeah, discover. And then we go, but how do you do that? How do you help buyers discover for themselves your value? And so we spend a lot of time.
So let me guess, Charles, that's Calavia then.
That's Calavia. So we spend a lot of time.
You want to say that again? Because I think that's really important for everybody. The question was, how do you?
So the question is, how do you help buyers discover your value? And our entire sales process, i.e. Calavia, is designed to help businesses, not just the individual salesperson on the ground, but marketing, all these other components, operations, really push that value proposition of, we're not here to sell you something. We're here to help you buy something. And that may sound a little cliche and tongue-in-cheek, but I think most of the world of selling that I'm familiar with does the complete opposite.
Right. Well, I
think that's a big relief as well, because what we see every day is, we're getting, these solicitations that we're not asking for. We're being told, what we need, by, whatever company or something like that. And no one's listening. No one's listening to what, the buyer's need is. And, how do you position it to where it's something that they want to do versus, it's all day long. You're like, no. But then it's like, it's that self-realization. It's a form of negotiation. It's one of the things like Chris Voss goes over in his book, Never Accept Halfway or something like that.
Never split the
difference.
I'm sorry?
Never split the difference.
That's it. It's the mirroring technique to a certain extent. It's giving them the opportunity, to think. If you codify that, or process it, that takes the effort out.
I've heard you speak, Charles, a number of times about selling versus buying. And I understand. So let's go back to Calavia in a sense. So basically, the value proposition you're talking about is, how do you help your client or your prospect to discover your value? So Calavia, which is an outgrowth of much of the work that you've done with the playbooks and such that you've developed on the criteria for success, what's going to be unique about Calavia?
So one thing that's unique is it really consolidates, it brings to market a soup to nuts sales process. Excuse me. So you've got that baked in. But better, and by the way, we don't call it a sales playbook anymore. We call it a strategy hub. And in the strategy hub, you have the ability as a user of Calavia to tweak, adjust, customize. But we're giving you a baseline. So you can start with some of the best practices that we've collected from working with all the companies that we talked about, hundreds and actually thousands at this point of salespeople. So in a way, it's an ability to distill their secret sauce. So that's number one. Number two, we have an intelligent goal-setting module baked into the product. And what I mean by intelligent is that we designed it to be easy to use, but also leverage the technology that everyone's chasing right now, and that is AI. And we have AI baked into the tool that helps people set goals, align goals with each other, because there's a whole methodology to setting goals. You setting goals means nothing if your goals aren't in line with your boss's goals. And
so now we go back to the five segments. You talked about marketing, sales, people, finance, operations. You're basically talking about when you say, if sales sets goals, but isn't collaborating or collaviating, how about that? Isn't collaviating with marketing and HR and operations and finance, the goals really will not have the impact on that profitability and that growth that you're looking for. Would you agree with that?
Totally. Yeah, you hit it. That's exactly what we're talking about. And if you think about how you change behavior, because I think the worst way to change behavior is to say to somebody, you need to change your behavior. Because number one, they're going to get defensive. And if you present somebody with the way you're doing things doesn't work, here's a better way, you're likely to get the same result. They'll get defensive. However, if I present a model to you where baked into the model, for you to use the model requires you to change your behavior, then all you need to do is buy into the model, not buy into the fact that the model is making you change your behaviors. I'll give you an example. Going back to what you just said, Michael, about the 5 behaviors. If when we work with a client and we present Calavia and we suggest, everything's optional, that the CEO, because they're buying into the 5 functions in their company working together, and they're setting annual goals for the company. So let's say we're now in planning season for 2024, and the CEO and the executive team are working on what's our plan for next year, how are we going to grow the company, what are our goals. I would argue that most CEOs would function narrow. Their frame of reference is a narrow swim lane. They'll think about how much revenue I want for the company, maybe a couple of initiatives in sales and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. But if I present the CEO with a model that says, for you to get the best out of Calavia that you've just bought into, we're going to recommend you set goals for your 5 functions, because you're the top of the pyramid. You're the one that now each one of those 5 functions is going to follow your mandates. It forces you out of this narrow swim lane to start looking at your company at a much broader level, where you're now saying, oh, well, for 2024, as the CEO, what do I want for my company in sales, in marketing, in operations, in finance, and in human resources? And that will then prompt the CEO to lay down the goals for the year that then each of those owners that report to the CEO of those 5 functions, sales, marketing, operations, et cetera, they're going to see those goals, and they're going to see those as a direction that they need to follow and set their goals to align with the CEO's goals in each of those areas. Now, they can be, they have autonomy. They can certainly set goals outside of that. They can add their own goals. But at a minimum, the CEO now has confidence, because we have a model that helps the people reporting to that person to be able to line up. And guess what? If they don't like a goal, they're going to argue. That's why we have executives that we respect. They'll say, I don't think we should implement HubSpot. I don't think we should do an inbound marketing program based on that model. We should do something different. So regardless, you're still having what I would consider a valuable conversation about how you're going to grow your business beyond what I typically see is, 1 or 2 or 3 things. Now we're looking at the whole business.
So if I were going to summarize, and at this point, I want to stop a little bit about Calavia, and I want to ask you some other questions, more personal. But if I were to summarize for a moment, it would sound to me that what you've developed over the years of your experience in Criteria for Success, and now launching with Calavia, is a platform that basically recognizes that unless you are collaborating between the 5 functions of your business, you will not be able to drive revenue nor profitability. The key to that really is that collaboration. And this platform basically enables that. So we're going to coin a new phrase. We're not going to say collaborating anymore. We're going to say collaviating.
Well,
Right?
that's why I love you, because you come up with this stuff. This is exactly how you were able to be the CEO of Netland that grew us to a very respectable number in revenue and a very respectable number in employees. It was your leadership that allowed us to do that. And things like this is an example of that. So, love it.
Well, anyway, thank you for that.
Well, before we go any further, if people want to learn more about those,
Yes.
Where can they go to do that, Charles?
Thank you, Chad. So you can go pretty simple, Collavia.com, COLLAVIA. It's a mashup of 2 words, collaborate and via, which is Latin for the way to collaborate. And something else I want to mention, because I think it's important, and that is I want people to realize that what we're developing, yes, we've developed a platform. We think it's pretty slick, but we don't want to be the ones that implement the platform. We want coaches and consultants. So we want to create this community of like-minded coaches and consultants who are providing skills. It could be executive coaching, it could be sales coaching, marketing coaching, operations coaching, to be able to use Collavia to drive their own specialty, as well as introduce the idea of unifying this, to Michael's point, what is it called?
Well, collaviating.
Collaviating. I have to use that a couple of times so it sinks in. But yeah, we want a lot of collaviators out there to really change this, because I think it sounds simple, but it's pretty disruptive to implement an idea like this.
Well, let's this is really wonderful. But I wanted to get to some other questions. I want to say, Charles, what inspires you? What motivates you? What has brought you? I mean, you did Criteria for Success, and now you're doing Collavia. And we talked about your early days in terms of, GE, Mobile, Netland, etc. What inspires you? What motivates you? What keeps you going?
So I think I owe my answer to my mother.
Okay.
And my mother, may she rest in peace. She passed away a while ago. The best way I could describe my mother succinctly is she always saw the good in people. I'd like to say I do. I don't think I come anywhere near as great a job because my mother's loved by everybody. I'm sure if you met her, you would have loved her. I mean, you actually may have met her at one point.
I did.
And mine's very similar with a twist. Yes, I like to think that I see the good in everybody, because if you don't, or at least if I don't, then I have to take a position that I don't like this person, or I have to take a position that I'm better than, or I'm different, or my point of view. And what drives me, to answer your question, is I think everybody can teach me. I really believe that. And it's not like they have to have an encyclopedia of knowledge. I just think that by virtue of the fact that you're a human being, if you come into my circle, or I have the privilege to come into your circle, into your life in some form, even if it's for a brief amount of time, I want to learn from you. And it could be how to smile better, or it doesn't have to be big. So I'm very lucky in that I've got a community of people that teach me. So I'm a member of an organization called Vistage. And I'm privileged to, number one, be a member, but number two, I'm a speaker. And what that means is that Vistage pays me to go around the country to talk to usually groups of 10 to 20 CEOs at a time. And I'm presenting my view on sales, or my view on collaboration, all the stuff we've talked about. But I got to say, without exception, and I've been doing this for 15 plus years, every talk, I'm getting back in the car or I'm getting back on the plane, I learned something. So I always like to think that I got as much from that talk that I gave than hopefully they got in hearing it. So that's what drives me, Michael. I think just this passion for learning.
So building off what you're talking about, giving presentations and interacting with people. If you were able to go back to your 20-year-old Charles and meet him in the time travel cafe, what would be a piece of advice or perspective that you would give that Charles that he didn't have that you have today?
If you want me to tell you the truth, it's nothing to do with what we're talking about. What I would tell me, the 20-year-old me, is save money. Don't spend like a nut job. To me, and I'm sure that reflects a lot of things, right? This sort of immediate gratification, have fun, go travel, do all of those things. But there's a responsibility element that I would tell my 20-year-old version of myself to, you're not going to be 20 for the rest of your life. At some point, you're going to find that you're close to retirement and you have a nest egg that you can cash in. Not that I would want to. And the answer is no. And so it's not that I feel like I'm forced to work, because I love what I do and I love my job and I love my work. But gee, wouldn't it be nice to at least have the luxury to make that choice, right? So to me, it's all a product of the choices I made in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. It's like it's all accumulation. I could have gotten lucky and come up with a business that took off and I could have won the lottery. But to give myself the best advice looking back, it would be more fiscally responsible. Like literally put a bigger percentage of your earnings away and don't spend it as unwisely as you.
Well, it's very interesting because kids today, young people today, are really much into experiences, and so yeah, I can understand that. Well, that's interesting. That is very interesting. Chad, any more thoughts? We're hitting about 37 minutes.
Yeah, no.
We could go on. I guess if we're finding this fascinating.
Yeah.
Anything in particular you want to ask my friend here, Mr. Bernard?
No, yeah, we're definitely at the time point where we need to start wrapping it up. But I'm always interested in asking someone kind of like what's going on under the hood, and in the communications area of what you do is what is an experience that you had from a communication perspective. Maybe you were talking to a client, you were giving one of your presentations, and it was one of those that just kind of clicked. Like you were in the zone, everything was moving right. It turned out the way you envisioned. How did you get to that point? Is there an experience like that you can pinpoint that you've had?
In terms of communication?
Yeah.
Well, how much time do you have? So I have to really think.
4 minutes.
So I'd say there's a lot, and I'm going to give you two because I want to give you contrasting perspectives. One is as an employer, where I had experienced an employee who taught me some stuff and was probably a third of my age, and then as on the other flip side, one area is when I was converting from being a techie to going into sales. So I've been writing this book, and I start my book by saying, a sales manager will teach you a lot if you're a salesperson. A sales trainer might teach you a lot if you're a salesperson. But if you're a salesperson, the person that's going to teach you the most is a good buyer. There's a lot of bad buyers out there, but a good buyer. And that happened to me, Chad. I was very, very privileged to work with a gentleman called Irv K. at Mobil Oil. and I didn't know my butt from my elbow, and I was stumbling around, and I had this mandate from GE, General Electric, the company I work for, to get us on the bidder list to win a big project. And at the time, I had no idea how effective this guy was at communication and helping me communicate more effectively. But he taught me a lot of what I believe is important in the world of communication as it relates to getting things done and sales. He really mentored me, which kind of doesn't make sense, right? Because you're a buyer, you're supposed to get things, you're not supposed to give things. And then on the flip side, I had an employee who became our head of marketing, Ariana Miskell. And she was an intern. And we did this chemistry test exercise. It's just all communication, Chad. So when you interview someone, you want to see how do they communicate, et cetera. And we asked her what was something she didn't like to do but would do anyway. And I'll never forget her answer because it totally floored me. And we had her write on a whiteboard because that's part of the exercise, seeing people's body language, et cetera. And she writes ballet. And I do a double take. And there are other people in the room, and we're all kind of like, ballet? You don't like to do it, but you'll do it anyway. And she describes the situation. I think in my mind, that's what got her hired. It was the way she communicated this story. And she said, yeah, my mom, now I'm in college, but before in high school would drive me to ballet school twice a week, get me up at 5:30, and I do all these torturous exercises, and I'd come home and have to take an ice bath because I would have sprained something, or I would have, hurt something, or damaged a toe, damaged a ligament, something, right? I didn't like doing it, but I did it. So if you're sitting there listening to this person, and one of the requirements to hiring a really top-notch marketing person, intern, employee, at least in my book, one of the things that I look at is stick-to-itness and ability to punch through obstacles. What do you think that story demonstrated to me?
I think you just touched on another topic that could be another episode, and I'm going to hand off to Michael here as we wrap. But definitely there is an issue with doing hard things today, in doing exactly that. But Michael, what do you have to take us out with?
Well, I'm just going to say this has been most informative. Honestly, I've known Charles for a lot of years, and I have to say that I'm captivated by your eloquence and the way that you talk about things. And I hope that our audience is as captivated as I am and as Chad is. This has been really remarkable. I want to thank you for being our guest. I want everybody to visit Collavia.com, COLLAVIA.com. And, maybe in a few months, we do some more podcasts. You'll come back, Charles. We'll talk more about your philosophy, because I know that you said some really great things about you learning from your buyers, the difference between selling and buying. There's so much to learn about what you've learned and what you give over the years. So thank you again. As always, Chad, my co-host, my friend, and my Collavia. No, my collaborator.
I don't know.
I have to work on that.
I think we may have gone too far.
But so I'm Mike Gansel, Voice of Reason Consulting. My dear friend, Chad Eves, Executive Communication Brief. We'll have our contact information as well as Charles in the, what do you call that?
In the show notes.
In the show notes.
Yeah.
And again, this has been wonderful. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for the opportunity, guys.
Have a good day, everybody. Hello, everybody. This is Chad Eves. I'm one of the two hosts for the Meaningful Communication Show. My partner is Michael Gansel, and we would both like to thank you for checking in on this episode and watching it, and invite you to subscribe to it on our YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube and search for @The Meaningful Communication Show, and from there you can see all the episodes, and also leave us some comments, some thoughts, maybe some topics that you would like to see covered. If you'd like to learn any more about us, for Michael, go to voiceofreasonconsulting.com. And for myself, you can go to chadeves.com and you'll get links to my businesses and my other podcast.